This is the tale of the Navigator, being a newly invented adventure most diverting and edifying, occurring in an exotic setting, relating a scandalous plot, delightfully curious, and handsomely played by lively characters of both sexes in pursuit of great fortune and love everlasting. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. Good night. It's been really funny. I'm kidding. All right, here we go. Chapter 1. Our story is set a very long time ago in the forgotten deserts of faraway lands. It concerns Isa, the wealthy navigator. A navigator in the desert, you ask? Why, of course, but not of ships. For Isa led fleets of camels loaded with trade goods, horses bearing travelers, and many pilgrims on foot through the trackless oceans of sand, where others would be lost forever. This Isa was an average man, of regular features and moderate height, simple in dress, typical in thought, speech, and action. The one distinctive proclivity that set Isa apart from his peers was his inordinate love for the letter S, because that was the first letter of his name in its native spelling. So Isa bought and sold only silk and silver, spices, scimitars, scrolls, slaves, sandalwood, and salt. And because he was often willing to pay the very highest price for the very highest quality, his strict adherence to this absurd monomania eventually rewarded him with a fine reputation and lucrative monopoly of trade in these specific items. Isa the Navigator was a particularly proud and jealous man, for he kept a fabulous harem, and his favorite, his wife Noor, was the pride of the precinct, which reached all the way from the heart of the icy mountains all the way down to the sea, 2 weeks away. Noor was worth a mile of silk, setting for 77 in sterling silver, a caravan of spices, a caravan of salt, and another caravan loaded with sandalwood statues of saints. Noor was educated and literate. She was a verified virgin upon marriage, a demi-princess of semi-royal blood. She was not very tall, but she was sumptuously formed, and she had a face that some described as a full moon, others as a pearl. Her voice was acclaimed for its music, and her nickname was the Singing Brook, or Little Bird, for she was by far the most graceful dancer in all the harem. She had inspired singers, artists, and poets to compose masterpieces, and her fame was spread wide, and everywhere with it went Isa's possessive anxiety. Noor's passion was the constant improvement of her harem castle and its surrounding gardens. Before it was even built, she insisted on a location with fresh water that fell over a waterfall, herds of clever deer for her to hunt, and precious gemstones like gravel to pave the footpaths. She required red jasper and green malachite and blue lapis tiles on all the walls. She decreed that the floors be smothered with rare furs, thick carpets, and the skins of the most enormous tigers of every nation. She saw to it that there was a mulberry field, a tea plantation, and a vast garden full of every possible variety of vegetable, arbors heavy with every fruit, rows of various grapes in her vineyards, and every other plant that she could discover. This harem castle palace was the ornament of the nation. Foreign potentates and dignitaries could not believe that this marvelous resort was not attached to some impossibly greater capital. But no, it was only the Navigator who exhausted his fortunes keeping up with his wife's constant expenditures. His only demand was that a terrible wall surround all of it, with a single gate and a single guard and a single key, which only the proud Navigator held. And Noor did not have a choice, for despite all her ambition, she was nothing more than Isa's wife, bought and paid for. So, for all her celebrity and charm, Noor was not happy. Despite her spellbinding beauty, the singing bird was filled to overflowing with the most caustic sarcasm. One morning, she was stamping her foot, complaining to her feminine retinue. "Oh, you have all done quite well to end up here." Noor glanced dramatically around the flower-bejeweled harem garden, and she continued with a piercing little shout. "Eek! I had to settle for a mere traitor. Oh, but that I could have married a true prince. Then I would live in real splendor." The lesser wives, concubines, and even Lelasha the slave pleaded, "No, we need our queen here with us. Noor, you improve us with your perfect dancing, and you teach us elocution, poetry, geometry, natural philosophy, medicine, singing, chiromancy, the blending of perfumes. You teach us how to graft roses of many colors onto one plant, and thus also with citrus fronds. Only with your instruction can we till and sow these gardens in the proper order with the heavens above. Oh, madam, you seduce us with your moonlit bathing. We surround and watch you sleep, for the sheer love of your voluptuous slumber. We are all jealous of Isa's greater love for you." "Do not mention that man," Noor shouted. I wish it would be lost in the desert. Then at least all of this would be mine. No one knew what to say then, and all of the pretty damsels only looked down or at each other in blushing silence while their madam fumed, and as the beggars in the street used to sing. Walls of straw absorb all noises, but tiled walls reflect all voices. Thus, these diatribes of the dancing brook eventually reached the ears of Navigator. Oh yes, as Isa spent his appointed time with each of his women in order of rank, his wives, concubines, and even the slave Leilasha would share more and more mentions of perhaps a word here or there, and by the end of the month, Isa could usually assemble a full picture of the favorite's true mood and probable intent. Nor is their general, Isa admitted to himself, adding bitterly, and I am just her obstacle. Chapter 2. The Navigator was well known to be a shrewd merchant, but the true secret of his wealth was in his infallible sense of direction. He guided his parades of traders through the dizzying monotony of the dunes, and like magic they always saw the next oasis rise up from the horizon, according to his exact predictions. The Navigator was secretive. Every morning he would erect a few sticks to act as a frame over his camel's saddle, claiming that he needed shade for reasons of health. Even though the children and aged walked unprotected in the sun all day, Isa draped a sheet over this frame to create a small canopy, and he spent his days sheltered from the sun under this contraption, and everyone marveled that the Navigator could sit concealed under this shroud and still turn his beast to the right direction ahead. How did he do it? No one knew, and for this they paid in silver, or salt, or spices, but never in ivory or gold. Under his little canopy, the Navigator works his magic. Isa took a small black stone from his pocket, and he pulled a needle out of his turban. He stroked the stone with the needle several times and dropped the stone back into his pocket. He removed a wooden bowl and a small slip of paper. He balanced these items on his lap carefully, and he uncorked a flask. He poured some water into the bowl, recorked, and stowed the flask. Isa floated the patch of paper on the water and carefully dropped the needle onto it. The paper suddenly turned, and the needle pointed in a certain direction, no matter how the bowl was rotated. The camel lurched and swayed underneath him. The Navigator had to hold the bowl of water lightly, but he only needed to look at the floating needle for a moment to see the direction the genie of the winds had given it. We shall not go home yet, my floating needle, but to the south until we reach the sea. He gently snatched the needle up out of the water, made sure it was dry, and stuck it back into his turban. He blotted the paper on his sleeve and put it back into his pocket. He drank the water from the bowl, thanked all the genies of the desert, and tugged on his camel's lead. The beast turned to the left just so, and all the wealth and all the animals and all the people who followed along behind looked up and saw the leader's new direction, and they murmured to each other, "Look, the Navigator has changed course again." Whence issues his infallible and uncanny vision. And they never could riddle out the secret of Isa's magic. No one could, not even the favorite wife Noor. And whereas Isa was so easily able to unravel Noor's private designs by simply interviewing his lesser wives, concubines, and the slave Leilasha, the magnificent Noor was unable to decipher even the most basic principle of Isa's hidden technology at all, and this apparent limit to her knowledge, and its potential to help her get rid of her husband, fired her desire to learn all of Isa's system with total fixity. She began to study her husband's every move, his every word, and especially his every possession, as he prepared for his journeys. Fortunately, the Navigator traveled lightly and only took 3 or 4 meager possessions with him. Long had Noor been aware of the needle in his turban. She hated the stupid thing, telling him, "If I wanted to be scratched in the dark, I'd keep a damn cat." She knew all about the black rock that Isa carried on his expeditions. Whenever he was absent from their chamber, she would steal it from his cloak pocket and inspect it with great care. She rubbed this stone with silk and amber. She tested it with rose water and spirits of alcohol and even of turpentine. She exposed it to sunlight and moonlight and the light of an eclipse, but her alchemy failed her completely, and she eventually decided, this is just an ordinary black stone. The only reason he carries it around is because his superstitious father and his grandfather did before him. Oh, men are so stupid! Finally, one day, Noor discovered that Isa carried a small patch of paper with him wherever he traveled. She understood immediately. Surely this is a magical talisman. Nor whispered to herself in a quivering thrill. She quickly and carefully inspected the white slip and replaced it back into Issa's pocket. She pretended not to know anything about it, but oh, how she racked her brains. That night, she paced her meandering, moonlit garden paths, reasoning, Issa's talisman is good heavy paper. It is the proper size, but every other charm I have ever seen before was printed with omens or oaths, scriptures, symbols or signs, blessings or blasphemies, hexes or hieroglyphics. But this one that Issa carries is empty. It is as blank as the summer sky. Oh, her mind raced about, searching for answers. She almost burst with curiosity. On the third morning, Nora awoke to find the answer awaiting in her mind, exclaiming, surely a pattern is printed on that slip of paper, but with some invisible media. Nora pondered this new riddle as her breakfast was served, and as she reached for the salt, the answer came to her suddenly. Salt! The designs are printed in salt. Like its taste on the tongue, salt's designs on the paper are invisible but effective. The beautiful lady sprang to her feet and danced with delight. If I can only dip it in water, the salt will dissolve, and the talisman will be racked. The very next opportunity she had, Nora stole and quickly dipped this slip of paper into a vase of water. She patted it dry and replaced it into Issa's pocket. She had done it. Her loathsome husband would soon be lost forever in the insatiable desert, and she would inherit the Navigator's fortune and live in her garden palace like a true queen, answering to no one but herself. On the night before Issa left on his last journey, Nora took him repeatedly, grasping him closely until she cried herself to sleep with sheer joy. Then she arose at dawn, prepared Issa's breakfast by her own hand, attended him herself with a smile, and bade him a cheery farewell. As soon as the gate was shut behind him, the favorite whistled, clapped her hands, and called her companions together for a party. They danced all day. They celebrated as if there were no tomorrow, and Nora bragged that she would soon be the most powerful woman in all the valley. And the other wives and the concubines and the slave Lelasha wondered at her meaning, but they applauded and cheered at the strange news all the same. Nora consulted her calendar daily and awaited for intelligence of her husband's loss in the confounding maze of the roasting dunes. But her freedom was not to be. Issa returned with his caravan, fit and healthy as ever, exactly on time. Nora almost fainted away with disgust at the very sight of him, and that evening she claimed her woman's time and passed Issa off on his lesser wives and concubines. Defeated once, but not about to give up, Nora was doubly determined to learn her husband's magical procedure. She used every stealthy and exotic skill she knew to ferret out a clue from the Navigator, yet even her most casual mentionings of his craft, of finding direction when the heavens are obscured, or when the horizon is unbroken, or when the mind is lost in vertigo, all made Issa quite suspicious, sullen, and silent. Oh, behind the veil, her feminine anger was becoming incandescent. Nora ran to her bathhouse. She pulled at her hair, tore at her clothing, and racked her brains again until she was in tears. She knew her husband was not nearly anything as intelligent as she. How could his magic perplex and elude her so completely? The other wives and concubines knew to avoid the favorite when she was this upset, so they sent the slave Lelasha to deliver food for Nora to nibble, also strong wine and a deep goblet. Lelasha played the harp for her lady. She worked the fan and dressed Nora's hair with perfume and silk in the popular northern style, but nothing the slave could do would console her mistress. Lelasha finally broke the silence. You have worked this problem for a year today, my lady. Perhaps it is not the proper riddle for you to solve. What if your discovery would ruin Issa's magic? Then his income would be all gone. Nora shook with rage. You nosy little fool! I'm no longer concerned with wealth. In case you have not noticed, I already own all there is to have. Oh, how could a mere slave like you ever understand what really matters in this world? It is power that I desire. Issa has it, and I want it. Are you too blind to see that upon this one tiny skill of his, this one insignificant stunt, this simple game, his entire life depends? The dancing bird shrieked these lamentations in such volume that all the other wives and concubines rushed to the alarm and watched aghast as Nora consigned the hapless slave Lelasha to sleep on the roof of the palace harem. You do not belong in this harem. You are not one of us. You never were. That my beautiful courtesans and I must consent to share our man with a foreign slave is an insult I cannot bear. Henceforth, unless Issa calls for you himself, you shall never call my roof your own again. In the heat of the next day, while Isa was sleeping, Noor began the investigation of her husband's magic all over again. She rifled through his clothing, finding nothing but the steel needle that pinned up his turban, the curious slip of white paper, the black rock in the bowl. Oh, I forgot to mention Noor's study of Isa's water bowl. Well, every man carried one, as was the custom in those sultry climates. Noor looked at the cheap wooden vessel with disdain. It had hundreds of tiny scratches around the rim. There was a large triangle with its point touching one of these marks, and a smaller triangle exactly opposite it, and two more triangles even smaller still to each side at exactly 90 degrees. He is not a very imaginative decorator, she thought. I would have done it up nicely with paisley. And she recalled a childhood song. Pretty girls drink straight from the jug, but every boy needs a bowl or a mug. Nora winced at the object and crammed it back into Isa's robe, and she left the room before he awoke. Nora tended her silkworms in their mulberry bushes. She brewed tea with a cotillion of visiting geishas. She danced and bathed and traded massages with the other wives and concubines, but in her mind was always that little slip of white paper. That was something she could never explain, and the mystery of it all was beginning to become more than she could bear. Her hair began to turn white, and there was darkness growing under her eyes. Nora finally gave up. She accepted that if she could not disable Isa's white talisman, then she would just have to take it away from him somehow. She decided that she needed a completely new plan. 3 dreamless nights passed, and on that third morning, Nora awoke from her sleep with a smile. Her excellent mind had devised a flawless plan for the perfect theft of Isa's precious little charm. Chapter 3. Nora began to feed the birds outside her window. Some of them began to enter her apartment. She fed these few so well and regularly that some of them became quite tame. She whispered spells to the smartest of these little birds, and she sang charms to them and prayers, and one by one she got to know them all. She chased away any bird she found wanting, and soon selected the very bravest of those remaining, and continued until she knew of all of them which one loved her the very most. She shuttered her windows and concentrated her attention upon this one creature, a delicate little wren. Nora named her Sophia. Nora fastened a tiny gold ring to Sophia's leg. At first the little bird pecked at it, and she hopped around and had trouble flying about the harem. The lessons had begun. Nora spent months teaching and training, exercising, educating, and entertaining, feeding and fondling, protecting, petting, and perfuming her little Sophia. They began to work outside, and eventually, and in complete privacy, Nora taught her little pet to fly high and spot a caravan 100 miles away. Nora cast spells to keep Sophia invisible to the eye of the falcon. Eventually, Sophia was ready for her primary deployment. She had learned everything Nora taught her and was strong enough to fly garlands and loops in the air with the golden ring on her leg. Nora was almost trembling with delight as she kissed her little agent, singing, "Little bird, do your best work for me, and before too long, we shall both be free." Sophia chirped and nodded. One evening, Isa appeared at the favorite's apartment. The slave Leilasha answered the door, welcoming him to Nora's chamber, and assisting her liege in removing his dusty cloak and his heavy boots. Leilasha blended and poured citrus, mint, and rose waters into a bowl, which she held out so that Isa could refresh his face and wash his hands. She set the bowl aside, and she used her apron to dry his face and hands. Isa sat down and relaxed as Leilasha washed his feet. She gently dried and placed slippers on them. Then they both stood up, and they smiled at each other, and Isa rewarded Leilasha with a little kiss. Just then Nora entered the room, and she shouted, "That is enough!" She quickly sent Leilasha off to get more food, and fetch the musicians, and strain the wine, and boil the coffee, and fill the hookahs, and replace all these burned-out tapers with new candles. Nora clapped her hands twice, and Leilasha ran away on the silent carpets, taking her bowl and vase with her. Isa and Nora sat down to dinner. Isa looked into his wife's eyes, and despite everything he knew about her disobedient longing for independence and her foolish obsession with his magic, he still loved her. He longed for her all the same, whether she was across the desert or across the table. She is beautiful, as no woman has a right to be, the Navigator thought. And he marveled at the power of his own desire, and he could not help but feel overwhelmed with passion for her. For her part that evening, Nora was patient and wary. She would be so glad to see him leaving in the morning, But the last time she had allowed herself to celebrate before victory was secured, she had been crushed so painfully. So this time, she enjoyed and savored her time, her last meal with the Navigator. But she simmered inwardly. She seethed herself behind her innocent smiles. Look at him, she thought, drunk with the erotic urge of the lowest animals, too blind to see his own peril. Later that night, when Issa took his woman, she gave of her love rather generously, knowing that she owed him more than he got, and that soon she would be rid of him forever. The day after Issa left with his caravan, Nor ordered the slave Leilasha to follow it. All the lesser wives and concubines wept, as Nor ordered Leilasha to pack a bundle of food and some water. Nor dragged the hapless slave to the gate by her hair, and called for the door to be opened. The guard outside replied, "But madam, there is none here to enter." And Nor shouted, "Silence, guard! This slave is being sent to Issa for his comfort!" And the guard simply did not know what to say. So he opened the gate to speak with Nor. But Leilasha the slave shot through the aperture like a filly, and as the confused guard watched in utter shock, Nor screeched aloud after her, "Follow the tracks before they vanish, or you will surely die out there!" And she shrieked with laughter as the gate slammed shut in her face and the bolt slid tight. Nor and all of her companions raced up the rampart to the wall's top railing, and they watched and waved their scarves as Leilasha ran away like the wind over the first dune. And that was the last any of them ever saw of her. 2 days after Issa's caravan left the compound, Nor sat at her desk and wrote a letter to her husband. From the perfumed hand of Nor, the most splendid dancer in all the valley, the most beautiful woman of the age, a famous astrologer, poet, and tamer of wild and dangerous beasts, useful in the garden, the kitchen, and the bedchamber. To the eyes of Issa, her wealthy merchant husband, the brave and cunning Navigator. Sir, today a most exotic caravan came calling from Syria. Or maybe it was Siam or Spain. Anyway, the leader of the traders is called Solomon. He has 7 horses for sale, and among them is a stunning stallion named Caesar, who can be ridden to victory by savage soldiers, or swift racers, or simply be put to stud. He costs 7,000 silver shekels, and will only be available for 7 days. And then Solomon must leave for Salamanca, or perhaps Sudan. Solomon sends salubrious salutations by way of his sparrow Sophia. If you want me to purchase Caesar, then simply reply by writing a note and tying it to Sophia's leg. Solomon assures that Sophia will bring it back here to me as fast as a bird can fly, and I will secure the spectacular steed for your stable. Sincerely, your devoted and most true and completely honest wife, Nor, who was most assuredly a virgin when your excellency married her, lo, these many happy years ago. Nor called Sophia to her finger. She carefully removed the gold ring from Sophia's leg, saying one last magical spell and kissing her assassin. She rolled up her letter and tied it to the bird's leg. With a tear of joy tinting her eye, Nor released Sophia to the wind, and as the tiny creature flew away, Nor had to sit down as the tension of her anticipation was overcome with the joy of fulfillment. Of course, Issa was quite startled when Sophia landed on his lurching canopy, chirping so brightly. Soon the pretty little wren was perched on Issa's finger, singing a pretty salute. The Navigator could smell the scent of Nor's rare perfume on her. He smiled with delight, and he carefully untied the little note, and as he read each sentence, he became more and more dizzy with an irresistible desire to own Solomon's Syrian stallion. "I must own this singular horse," he shouted, so loud that Sophia ruffled and peeped, and all the closer-by members of his caravan heard him, and they asked each other, "What horse does the Navigator desire? Has he gone mad?" And suddenly, Issa was on the ground, running from person to person, asking for, of all things, a piece of paper. For Nor had written her message in tiny letters that completely covered the entire page on both sides, so Issa could not reply unless he had another slip of paper to write on of his own. All he had to do was write the word yes on any small slip of paper, and he could buy the Spanish stallion from Solomon of Siam. Now, Issa ran like a possessed man from person to person, yet none of them could read. None of them could write. None traded or even carried scrolls because of Issa's monopoly. And neither was there any parchment, nor leaves of trees, nor anything at all to write on for hundreds of miles around. Isa almost exploded with frustration. Suddenly, he had an idea. He raced back to his wandering camel and climbed back up underneath his canopy with Sophia. She watched as he produced his wooden bowl and his flask, and he whispered to her in a fit of excitement, "Maybe I can wash the ink off of Noor's letter." Sophia nodded, and she hopped onto the rim of the wooden bowl as Isa filled it with water. She chirped a little, "Thank you," and Isa paused as she took a few little sips and refreshed herself. When Isa dropped Noor's letter into the water, the ink ran, the paper turned crimson and then black, the water boiled and fumed, and the message dissolved like ashes in the swill. Sophia shook her head, and Isa gasped with fear. "Oh, Noor, what despicable magic have you wrought upon me now?" With that, he brushed Sophia aside and spilled the stained bowl onto the sand as he leapt down from his camel once again to repeat his absurd inquiry after a slip of paper among the confused followers of the caravan. Finally, the navigator discovered on his second circuit that indeed one rather conspicuous man actually did carry an entire book of paper with him. Isa began to beg and plead for it. "I will give you this book's weight in salt, in spices, in silver, in ivory, in gold, in pearls." But at each escalation of price, the bearer of the book refused and became more and more offended, stating, "This book is sacred. It is the perfect word of God. I cannot sell it at any price." "Then sell me a page. Sell me a scrap," pleaded Isa, almost in tears of anxiety. "No, I cannot desecrate any part of this divine book for any reason or price," exclaimed the indignant holy man. At this, the navigator became enraged, howling, "I am the leader of this caravan. My words are law in this desert." A crowd formed to hear the dispute, but Isa proceeded as if he were alone with his adversary, speaking urgently, "Render unto me this book of paper, or a single page, or a scrap of a page, or I will abandon you to the burning sand." With that, the holy book's owner held it high overhead and bellowed with considerable volume, "Go on without me, you navigator! I place my faith in the celestial word of God above. Your magic of direction is a genie's trick, a conjurer's fakery, base technology of the earth. Only because I carry this book of sacred scripture with me, and only due to my constant prayers for God's divine mercy, do we find our way in this wilderness at all." Upon hearing this, the crowd quickly divided in half supporting the bearer of the book, half still clinging to Isa. Then Isa, completely mad with rage, lunged for the book and almost managed to grab it. There was a general melee. The book was spared, but at the end of the struggle, all of the navigator's followers had abandoned him. Clearly, he had become completely deranged by the hot desert sun. His canopy could not protect him forever, they said to each other, shaking their heads as they wandered away. Isa fell crying to the sand, surrounded by nothing but his camels. He gasped as burning tears slid down his face. Sophia fluttered to his side, and Isa whispered to her, "Have pity on me, Sophia. That stallion, his name is Caesar with a C and a Z. His name is clearly spelled wrong. It must be changed to Caesar with proper S's." Sophia nodded. Isa sat up. He winced and yelled out with anguish, "Oh!" He struck the sand with his fists. He finally overcame his emotions, and slowly, finally, he removed his slip of compass paper from his pocket. He wrote the words 6,000 silver shekels on one side, and he turned it over and he wrote Caesar in his faltering hand. He laced a thread through his needle. He sewed a string through the note, and he tied it with a knot to Sophia's leg. Isa shed another tear of hopeless agony and watched as Sophia ascended into the air. "At least I will die knowing that the supreme stallion is in my stable." So, sending Sophia to Solomon was at once Isa's supreme satisfaction and his sad, sorry suicide. In this state of shock and confusion, Isa untied and unloaded his tent from a camel, but it just fell where he left it in the sand. He staggered off and found some figs on another camel, and he ate a frugal repast as he watched the crowd follow the man with the holy book towards the farthest dune. He looked down at the sand, for Isa could not bear to watch as the adherents to the holy book disappeared over the horizon. Isa reflected that they followed a fool, but then he had to laugh at himself in bitter scorn. "And I am just as big a fool." He turned once more to see if Sophia was still visible in the distant sky, but she was long gone. Instead, Isa saw in the distance a single figure moving towards him. He rubbed his eyes. Surely this was a mirage, a genie of the desert, a fairy of the sweltering winds. But no! This running figure approached straight towards him. His curiosity momentarily quenched the pain of his caravan's loss, and even that of his precious slip of compass paper. He stood taller, and he strained his eyes to see who was coming across the desert, so all alone. Of course it was Lelasha. She ran up to her master and cried out with relief, "Oh, thank God I have found you, nor sent me to you or my death." And the slave fell at Isa's feet, and she kissed his robes. Isa was so shocked that all he could do was stoop down to her and lift her and confess that she was still as good as dead. "There was a mutiny in my caravan. Everyone has abandoned me. I sent away a piece of my navigating spell, and now we were totally lost." And he began to cry again, with shame and regret. Lelasha comforted her master. She dried his tears. She set up the tent. She put Isa into the shade, and she brought more food for them to eat, and she carefully listened to his total silence. That afternoon she began to reveal to Isa all that Nora had done. So the message was a fake. There never was a Solomon of Syria selling a 7th speedy stallion. Oh, I have been betrayed as no other man, and my ruin is complete. I want to die by the sting of a snake or a scorpion. Please go find me one now, Lelasha. Lelasha tilted her head, and she asked him, "So, master, do you really think it's utterly hopeless? We shall die right here?" "Oh, it is certain," said Isa with a rueful smile. "Without my direction, we are truly lost." "Then set me free now, so that I might die in liberty." Isa was distracted from his grief by Lelasha's request, so he looked at her. "So be it. You are now a free woman, Lelasha." She nodded. "Thank you. Now, sir, as you have already known me, to spare my honor, you must also propose marriage, so that I will not die a harlot in this desert." Now, on any other day, Isa would have been irritated by this brand of feminine nonsense. But finally he looked at Isa with a smile. "Oh, I have done much more foolish things today, Lelasha." "Lelasha, the free woman, will you marry me?" And he extended his hand to her, after the fashion of that strange land. And according to the nomadic custom, Lelasha took Isa's hand and said, "Yes. Now that I am your betrothed, you have truly spared my honor. Thank you." Isa nodded and said, "You are welcome, Lelasha. Now, will you please go and catch me a sinister scorpion or a slithering snake, so its subtle sting might prevent my longer and less pleasant death by thirst or starvation?" Lelasha shook her head. "The scaly snakes and secretive scorpions avoid the sun, but will show themselves by starlight. We must wait until dark before you can take your own life." So the couple retired to the shade of the tent to sleep during the last of the heat of the day. Lelasha awoke as evening claimed the desert. She placed her hand on Isa's shoulder, whispering, "Isa, wake up. I've had a dream." He slowly turned to face her. She nodded. "Before we are to die, we must first consummate this new marriage." Isa blinked a few times. They both sat up. She found the flask in the graying darkness, and they drank some water. They looked at each other through the silence, and finally he spoke. "Oh, woman, what you ask for is beyond all reason. My caravan has abandoned me. I have thrown away my magic. I am no longer Isa the Navigator. I am nothing now but your husband." He lowered his face, and he turned away from her. Lelasha drew closer, and she caressed him, and she whispered, "Shh." Isa turned to her, and she smiled at him, saying, "Here I am." He watched in silence as she delicately climbed on board his lap. Lelasha wrapped her legs around him, and she draped her hair over his head, and he felt the exquisite softness of her embrace, and he inhaled her faint sweetness. Lelasha kissed him, and she moved so slowly. "You are a good husband, Isa." She kissed him again and again, and she told him, "You are my husband now, and I want you." He closed his eyes. She pushed back and forth on him like slow music. "I need you to pay attention to me now. I need you to be with me." And she embraced him, and she rested her head on his, and she waited. Then Isa stirred. He gathered her into his strong arms, he lowered her onto the blankets, and he began covering her with his awakening kisses. Later that evening, the couple emerged from the tent. The full moon was riding high, and the stars above were an endless chandelier of tiny lights, and the night was bright with these illuminants, and the air was cool and sweet. What a splendid night to die! "Now will you please go gather me up a little scorpion?" "Yes, my husband." And just then a meteor sailed overhead, trailing a long, trailing glitter of light. "Oh, the genie sent a message," said Isa, and he put his hand out as if to keep Leilasha from moving, and they were both silent for just a moment. Leilasha spoke quietly. "Isa, my spouse, if you were able to navigate, could we still make it to safety?" Isa hesitated. "Well, yes, I suppose, but my navigation is totally ruined and I'm blind to the 4 directions. Now stop delaying and go find me a way out of this mess." Leilasha smiled at her husband and told him, "I might have another way." "Do you have a slip of paper?" Isa asked, turning to her quickly and reaching out as if to receive. "No, but I can read directions in the stars above." Isa leaned back and implored, "Leilasha, what are you saying?" Leilasha pointed up at a row of 3 little stars. "Well, that right there is the constellation known as Orion's Belt, and over there is Capricorn, and over there," she moved her arm, "is Polaris, the star directly above the North Pole." "But if that star is to the north, then our direction is over there." And Isa looked to the south. Leilasha smiled at him, nodding. Isa turned and pleaded of her, "How did you ever come to know the invisible tracks of the stars?" Leilasha smiled. "Oh, my people are sailors. I learned the names and movements of the stars from my girlhood. We all did. After being captured at sea and sold into slavery, I forgot most of it due to heartache. But lately, I've been sleeping on the roof of the harem palace to better remember the arrangements of the constellations above and those names of the celestial wanderers." And she proved to Isa her skills by pointing up again and saying, "And there is Venus, and there is Mercury, and over there is Mars." Now Isa was practically levitating with absolute joy. "We are saved! Leilasha, we are saved! Lead me to life. Teach me your knowledge. I am your student. I am your disciple. I owe you my very life." And this time it was Isa who fell to the ground. It was he who kissed the hem of her robe, and it was she who lifted him up laughing. And she did lead them to safety. Leilasha revealed more and more of her astral wisdom as they tracked their way across the desert by night. They rested during the day, but when evening came and the stars alit, Leilasha would find the northern star. Isa would then point the way, and together when they arrived at the next oasis, their relief was impossible to describe. They mingled with the other caravans. Isa procured more paper. They described the mutiny in the desert, and they learned that the followers of the man with the holy book were never seen again. Back in her harem apartment, Noor received Sophia and the talisman with ecstasy. That would be too much work for me to describe in this short tale. Her celebration started immediately and never ended. She spent the rest of her life lording over the lesser wives and concubines as a true queen, and having the harem garden wall slowly torn down and every brick stacked to form her majestic funeral crypt so that she could retain in death her capital place in the gardens, flowing with fountains, running with deer, chirping with birds, and flowing with flowers in regal perpetuity. Leilasha and Isa spent the rest of their lives traveling about and teaching others the use of the lodestone and the reading of the stars. They taught kings and vassals, captains, pirates, and sailors, desert thieves, shepherds, and farmers. They lived like students of the world, learning new languages, exploring ever more distant and exotic places, eating strange foods, wearing the bright colors of the foreigners, delighting in all they encountered, everywhere they went, nourished by their love for one another, becoming legends of wisdom and peace all over the world. The end.